Welcome to Lesson 2 in the WPF with MVVM add-on course. In this lesson, we're going to go through the initial setup of our project. That means we're going to create the WPF project, add Caliburn Micro, and do all the other setup tasks related to preparing our project. So let's jump right in. Here I have the tournament tracker application open. We're going to add a new project to our solution. So right-click on Solution and say Add New Project. We want Windows Classic under the Visual C#, a WPF app, in the .NET framework. Now, when we originally created our Tracker UI, which is our WinForm application, we were a little bit short-sighted in the fact that we called it just Tracker UI, which is a great short name, except for the fact that it does not allow for us to change the user interface without removing the existing WinForm user interface. Otherwise, you have to call it something different. And since we can have two different user interfaces live in the same project without stepping on each other's toes, I'm going to leave the WinForm application here for two reasons. One, I just like the idea of being able to switch back to the WinForm application if we need to. But two, as we build the WPF user interface, we can reference that WinForm user interface as our design guide. So we're going to leave it right where it's at. We'll call this application, this user interface, the Tracker WPF UI, which a little more wordy, but that's okay. So now we have our WPF application. We can right-click on it and say Set as Startup Project. Now when we launch this application, we're going to launch the WPF user interface, not the WinForm user interface of the Tracker UI. Now I'll close out the main window.xaml. We don't need it. But first we'll add the reference for the NuGet package. So manage NuGet packages. Go to Browse. And we'll search for Caliburn Micro. Caliburn Micro. So right-click on our project and say Add. And the very first thing we'll do is we'll add our three folders. Our View folder. Our Views folder. Should be plural. Add our Models folder. And we'll add one more folder for our View models. Now, if you're not familiar with Caliburn Micro, you should probably watch that YouTube video, like I said before. But essentially, this is the M, the V, and the VM. So MVVM. That's our framework in those three different pieces: models, views, and view models. Now the next thing we'll do is we'll add a view model. This is a class. And we'll call this the shell view model. That's kind of the default standard parent view model. We could call it something else if we wanted to, but we definitely have to end with view model. And shell is the most common used starting point. So we're going to leave it the way it is. That way it's easier for the next person coming along to jump right in, understand where things are. And shell just kind of makes sense. So we'll add. We'll make this a public class. And we'll inherit from conductor of type object. Now we have to do our control dot here and add the using statement for caliburn.micro. Now, the conductor essentially says that this page will have the ability to have children, one at a time children, meaning it can't have multiple children that it's remembering. It's going to have just the one, and when we want to have a different child, we have to close the first child and open the second child. So that's what conductor does. It allows us to have that first child, and that's what we want. That's all we're going to have in our shell view model for now. We're not going to actually put any content in there in this lesson. That's next lesson. Next, we'll create a corresponding view. So create a window, and we'll call this the shell view. So there we go. We have a view called our shell view inside of our views folder. So those are the two pieces we need to set up Caliburn Micro, our shell view model and our shell view. That's kind of like the getting started pieces. Now let's start modifying the rest of this application to use Caliburn Micro. So we'll put our bootstrapper in next. So we're going to right click on Tracker DPF UI, say add a new class. So this is right at the root of we'll hit Control dot to bring that in. Open and close our parens, and we're good to go. So again, if you're not familiar with Caliburn Micro, essentially what we're saying is that when you launch Bootstrapper, it's going to launch the default form. In this case, the default form is the shell view model, because in Caliburn Micro, we launch view models, not views directly, because the view model is kind of the quarterback for this application, the person who's in charge of the view. So we say, okay, the boss of the view is the shell view model, so launch that. It's going to go ahead and launch the actual view. So that's all this Bootstrapper really does at this point. You can add a whole lot more to the Bootstrapper, but right now it's all we're using it for is just saying, here's what you need to launch. So we hit save on this. Then we can come down here to our main window.xaml and delete it. Right click and say delete, because that was our starting point for our application, but now we've specified a new starting point. Well, mostly, because we have to come into our app.xaml, take out this startup URI, so I'll take out the entire line, and now we need to modify our application.resources to have our resource dictionary. So we start with resource dictionary, and then resource dictionary dot merge dictionaries, and then inside there another resource dictionary, and inside here we have a local colon bootstrapper. The X colon key is bootstrapper, and then that's a self-closing tag. So there we go. So now we have bootstrapper as the starting point for our application, not a specific form. But first, let's go to our shellview.xaml, and we're actually going to change a property here, add a property actually. And we're going to say the Windows startup location equals, and it's going to be center screen. That way it starts on this screen since I have more than one screen, not on my primary screen. So let's run this, And it should be the shell view just pops up here and it runs. And it does. And it says it came from the shell view model is where the title comes from. So we're all good here. We've got our base application started. So we have a starting point for our application. We have a starter form. We have our shell. We have our shell view model. And the Bootstrapper is set to go. We're all pretty much set with the Caliburn Micro side. But I do want to make a few changes that are going to apply across our application. Now, this shell view is going to be our parent, and everything will live inside here. So I want to come down here to our window for it, and I want to set a default font size. So font size equals, and let's make this 18. So now any item that does not have a specified font size will get the font size of 18. That's especially helpful because since this is a parent, any children that are on this page that don't have a specified font size will inherit the font size from the parent. Therefore, I have now set this application-wide. The other thing I want to do is add an icon. So to do that, first let's go to our Tracker UI, where I know there's an icon in this folder. It's not showing because I don't actually have it added to the project, but if I say, select this project and say show all files, I'll see the tournament tracker icon. So I can right click on this and say copy, and I'll paste it into my WPF UI as well. Now it doesn't show up there, but if I show all files, there it is. So let's right click and say include in project. And I'll modify the properties of this to say it's a resource. And yes, I want to copy if newer to the output directory. That way it's always in the output directory for the compiled version. So there I have my icon actually in my project, but I don't actually use it yet. So let's turn off the show all files, double click on properties. And in our icons here, we can now choose tournamenttracker.ico. Notice it changes this to that little clipboard right there. We can save this. We can also put an icon on our form itself, our parent form. And we can do that by saying icon equals /tournamenttracker.ico. And now if we run this, it gives us an error. And if you read the error, it says right here where it has cannot locate the resource views /tournamenttracker.ico. So when I said in our, let's close this out, right here I said // it took the dot that indicates the current folder. Well, shell view is not in the root of my project. So let's say .. Now what that does is it moves up one level. So we're in the views folder right here, and we want to be in the root of the folder to reference this tournamenttracker.ico. So therefore we have to move up one. So moving up one in the file system parlance, the file system way of doing things, is 2 dots. So it moves up one level. 1 dot is the current level. So let's try this. And this time, not only does it run, but we have, it's kind of tiny here, but right in the corner, we have our clipboard icon. So with just those few tweaks, we've got a WPF application that is running Caliburn Micro, that is set up for the MVVM style, that has a default font, and has a default icon or a custom icon for the entire application. So now we're all set to get started. In our next lesson, we're going to modify this shell view to have our list of tournaments over here, as well as a create tournament button. That way, we can then populate the child form with either a create tournament page or the current turnip page and all the other things that come along with it. So with that, this lesson's done. We can move on to lesson number 3.